We are good to go, Miss Amanda.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I know it's a busy time of the semester for everyone, so I appreciate your time and attention during this session. I am Amanda Joyce from Murray State University. I am an associate professor of psychology, and Murray State University is located in Kentucky. Both of those are going to be kind of important to the leaning that I am bringing into this talk today. This is meant to be an interactive session. I was really excited to see the option for a scholarly read for these sessions. I've never done anything like this before. I'm really excited to nerd out with you guys about an article that I found that just it hit me right in the heart about understanding students' perceptions of political bias in the classroom and nationwide, and the predictors that are going into whether or not they're perceiving this bias and how we might respond to all of that. So I understand not everybody has had the opportunity to read the article that I want to talk about today. So I'll give you the briefest of brief backgrounds, and then I just want to nerd out with you guys about your own experiences in this. I'm sure we're all coming from uh, different backgrounds, different parts of the country, different types of institutions, different roles within the institutions. And so I want to see how that's impacting your read of all of this. So again, this is a scholarly read. It's based off of an article that I did not write. I just was excited to read it. This is a study out of South Alabama looking into students' perceptions of political advocacy and inappropriate political advocacy within the classroom. I've put a QR code there so that you can track this down. If you look in the session description, there's also a citation for this particular article, so you can pull it up if you would like. But I want to give you the background on all of this. So the place that the authors were coming from is a place of understanding that academia leans slightly left, and that might influence some of the perceptions of political advocacy that our students have of us. So technically, the mode identity of a professor is a moderate. This is self-identifying from the professors themselves, not the students' perceptions of that leaning. But 46% are leaning moderate. But if you're on one edge or another, you're much more likely to identify as liberal than you are conservative. This changes from institution to institution. So liberal arts institutions tend to be a little bit more liberal. The local community colleges tend to be a little bit more conservative. Things are different in different disciplines. So humanities more on the liberal side, health sciences, computer sciences, business more on the conservative side. Um, More liberal in different parts of the country. So New England identifying much more liberally than, say, the Southeast. And I liked this point here, more liberal with age. 40 plus. I take great offense at that as somebody who is turning 40 in a few months. That is the cutoff for old in academia. But the perception here is that folks are identifying within academia as more liberal as they begin to get a little bit older. Now, that's where we are. And here's where things have gone from that. I was in college 20 years ago, and I remember waking up one morning, walking to class on the way to a test, and seeing flyers all over my campus. This was in Charlotte, North Carolina. Flyers on every single light post all the way to class that said liberal bias in academia. And this kind of rhetoric is still out here. So how liberals ruined college, how liberal professors are ruining college. So I guess still in the process of ruining it. Different groups are out there, Campus Reform and Turning Point USA, that are spreading this kind of information to our students and uh, the country as a whole. And you can see that it's begun to impact folks. So what we're seeing is the trust in higher education is kind of eroding away over time. This takes us from 2012 to 2019, a Pew Research study um, showing who feels like college has a positive effect, who feels like it has a negative effect. Um, and we see that, those who identify as more conservative have kind of shifted over into seeing college education as having more of a negative impact on America and on students. Um, and then you've got these little kernels of studies that have begun to turn up. So we know that conservative students tend to receive grades that are lower than liberal identified students. You could argue that there's something else at play here. Maybe there's socioeconomic status, and that's a third variable that is impacting the likelihood towards conservatism and lower grades. But then this one, as a psychology professor, this one is particularly troubling to me. So there's research that says that social science and humanities professors are less likely to work on research with folks who carry a conservative identity. So there is the potential for bias here. There is certainly the potential for perception of bias here. And so it's worth digging into this. And the place that this particular article is picking us up at is a place of trying to tease apart the level at which we perceive this bias. So they introduced an idea to me that I was unfamiliar with. So it may be new to you as well. This idea of Fenno's paradox. And Fenno's paradox is this paradox that we tend to feel negatively about something as a whole, but the closer it is to us, the more positively we feel about it. So folks are more likely to report, oh, the US government is a mess, and less likely to report that they feel negatively about those layers that are closer to them, like the representative from their own small area, right? Ditto with education. Oh, education is a mess. Department of Education is falling apart. Whoever's in charge of that is falling apart, right? So they're likely to say something negative about the overarching, but they're much more likely to endorse positive statements about those levels of education that are close to them, like their children's own teachers or employees within that school. So this Fenno's paradox is here explaining this in the government and in K-12 education. And the authors put forth this idea that maybe this is happening in higher ed as well. Maybe when folks are perceiving that academia is too liberal, there's too much advocacy, and this is ruining education. Maybe folks are perceiving that at the national level rather than at their own home institution. And so they set forth in trying to figure this out. Is Fenno's paradox at play, where they're feeling kind of icky about the national level of things, but feeling kind of good about their own university? So the researchers brought in roughly 850 participants in two spring semesters, 2018 and 2019. They asked them roughly the same questions across those semesters. There were roughly the same demographics across those semesters. It's much like the pool that I see when I do research on my own through the participant pool at Murray State, primarily white, primarily social science majors, primarily female, right? So there's kind of an inherent bias within the sample itself, and I think they do a good job acknowledging that. But it is characteristic of the university that they were at. So then they asked them two different types of questions about political advocacy. So first, thinking about all the professors you had, who's sharing their personal political views in class? They're labeling that as political advocacy in the classroom. Then the next question is, getting at how inappropriate they perceive this sharing to be. So your professors are sharing stuff. Is that okay? Kind of taking it to the next level. And then they ask it about the country in general, trying to get at this question of Fino's paradox. Are they perceiving things differently, more or less inappropriate at their home institution or at the national level? And when you get at that, um, political advocacy, not at the level of inappropriate political advocacy, but just political advocacy, what you find is that the mode answer is that professors aren't sharing these beliefs in their classes. So 70% never or just occasionally sharing these views. They're not viewing it as happening a ton of the time, except for 19% of students are saying that this is happening with some sort of regularity or even more. Where things start to get really interesting to me, though, are when we start to look at their views of if this is inappropriate. So the first graph over here on the left is regarding their own school. So are professors inappropriately politicizing the classroom? Um, Again, that one bar is our tallest bar. So we've got folks who are mostly saying, no, there's nothing inappropriate happening. Very few saying that they strongly agree that something inappropriate is happening at their own university. This is about 5% on that bar for five strongly agree. When you move into the national level, though, is something in the US happening inappropriately, you start to see a whole lot more people leaning towards those higher numbers, leaning towards this stronger endorsement that something inappropriate is happening, which would suggest that maybe that Fino's paradox is at play here, that they're receiving this information that makes them believe that something inappropriate is happening at other universities, but they are not personally witnessing it at their own university. So then they go to the next level. There were some demographic variables that were collected and some variables asking about their own political ideology, the perceived political ideology of the professors that they were working with. And you've got this bar graph here that's kind of indicating where they think that folks are leaning. In this case, the lower numbers are associated with leaning more towards liberalism, the higher numbers more towards conservatism. The stuff in the middle, which is the most common, is more moderate. So they largely, on average, view themselves as relatively moderate, and they largely view themselves as largely moderate. But there is this perception that professors are more liberal than those students. That number is lower, the professor number is lower, indicating more perceived liberalism. And we care about this for a number of reasons. First, because this impacts our teaching evaluations. So teaching evaluations that are used in many promotion decisions, decisions to keep people on board, those are negatively impacted when students believe that your ideologies do not match yours. We don't know the directionality here. It may be that they are rating you lower because you're having different ideas. Or it may be the case that when they like you more, they rate you higher and they're also more likely to assume, oh, I like them. They're just like me. Right. So we don't know directionality here, but it's still troubling that there's this association. So the authors thought, okay, well, if it's impacting student evaluations, it might be impacting these other things. And so they bring in these odds ratio tables, which I apologize, they're a lot. But they bring in these odd ratios tables to try to look at the likelihood of somebody endorsing statements of advocacy within the university. And on the next slide, I'll show you endorsing inappropriate advocacy. Turns out this first line of professor ideology, if your ideologies are different, then students are more likely to say there's been some political advocacy going on. If you have a more liberal advocacy, you are also more likely to be perceived as being more advocating more within the classroom. Other factors at play here: white students are more likely to perceive advocacy, younger students more likely to perceive advocacy, social science majors more likely to perceive advocacy, so on and so forth. So there's a lot predicting this. Now I want to switch forward. This was just straightforward political advocacy views of it within the classroom. Now let's look at how inappropriate folks see this. Many of the same things are being endorsed here. If the professor is viewed as being more liberal, they are seen as having more inappropriate classroom advocacy. If they have more perceived advocacy, period, within the classroom, they're more likely to be perceived as it being inappropriate. Differences in ideology are coming up here as well. So more differences in ideology, more likely to see things as inappropriate. The same factors as before, how old you are, how long you've been in college, that sort of thing. And this is happening in perceptions at the college level, but also at the US level as well. So they're taking these pieces innate to themselves and extrapolating it out to their perceptions of the United States as a whole. So big picture, students perceive more advocacy and more inappropriate advocacy when the professor is viewed as more liberal, less conservative, when there are perceived ideological differences, when students are younger, and when students are social science majors. One thing that didn't come up in any of this is the students' own ideologies didn't particularly matter. It was the ideological differences perceived between their own ideas and their professors' ideas. Now, they took this a step further and also looked at Rate My Professor ratings. I don't know about you guys, we have a very love-hate relationship with Rate My Professor in my department. But they were finding that students who were in political science, so social sciences, were more likely to rate inappropriate political advocacy, and it was specifically political science students were especially more likely to rate inappropriate political advocacy. So they said, we want to dig into this. Let's look at Rate My Professor reviews of political science professors. They looked into a little more than 1,000 of these professors' reviews, and they found that 62 had at least one complaint of political bias. Now, these are the most disgruntled of the disgruntled students who are running to Rate My Professor. So this is likely pretty good news that only 62 are complaining of this bias, right? If they're this largely disgruntled bunch, we would expect a whole lot more complaints. Now, in fairness to everyone, there were closer to 120 complaints. So roughly 10% are getting these complaints, except 4 professors got 30% of those complaints. I really feel for those 4 professors. That's rough. Those complaints showing up there. So again, we come back to this conclusion that folks weren't really this upset about this. Now, that being said, the majority of these complaints were about liberal bias, with very few being about a conservative bias, which is once again coming back to this problem that students are more negatively rating professors whose ideologies lean more towards the left. So big picture good news is that Fenno's paradox is probably at play here. This is showing that students tend to have a bigger problem with the US in general, and the higher education system, rather than what's happening at their own home university. But big picture of the problem here is that we've still got this non-trivial minority who are saying something inappropriate is happening. So 20% roughly are endorsing, hey, there's something sort of inappropriate happening. 5% are saying, no, there's definitely something inappropriate happening. And that means that a lot of our students are uncomfortable right now, and it has implications for how we reach them and how we run our classrooms as a whole. So I'm coming at you from a place of having all of the risk factors. So I am in a conservative state, and I teach a subject that requires me to touch on things that people view as more liberalized. So I teach psychology. We know social science is a risk factor here. And I teach it to freshmen who are also more likely to view problems here. And according to the American Psychological Association, I teach about a lot of things that are required by them and that I do personally endorse, but things like we should get vaccinated. And here's what's happening as vaccination rates go down in early childhood when we're talking about 4-year-olds in class. And when I talk about relationships in early adulthood, I view it as my ethical obligation to address relationships of all forms and not solely heterosexual couples who marry and then have 2.5 children and whatever else, right? So students have a tendency to get disgruntled as they see this advocacy happening. So I am in my own little silo here in Kentucky, and I want to hear where you guys stand in all of this, what your experiences are with students pushing back on ideas in your classroom, how you navigate having disciplinary standards that feel uncomfortable for some students. And also because the questions in this particular study are worded in a way that imply face-to-face classes, but we're primarily working with online classes here. I would like to hear how you guys think that's different, how you think maybe more or less advocacy is being perceived in that setting, and what you're doing about it all. Let's just nerd out. I'd love to hear from you.
This is a quiet bunch, if you haven't noticed.
That's okay.
Amanda, I'm more than willing to talk about it.
Go for it.
Okay, what's your experience? Have you been accused of politicizing the classroom? I have only had one student say anything, and it was and I think he posted to the wrong class because it wasn't even discussed. Okay, so this is one of our students, and what we do in the learning design team when we're talking about how we have to design for certain students, we give them numbers. So this is student number 2. So if anybody's here from FRCC team, they would know who I mean by student number 2. Because of student number 2, I had to go ahead and I had to write up something about the communication boards. I use Discord. Discord's a very friendly kind of chatty feel to it, but I had to in a Google document, and I'm more than happy to share with everybody. Oh, and I'm very verbose, so this could be way over what anyone would want, but this now goes with group projects and for discussions. There's 3 things I had to address: rants, trolling, and TLDC. So besides the, the nice things that everybody does for let's be professional, I had to define what a rant was. I had to define what trolling was, and I had to define TLDC. And like I said, this, sometimes we do lots of responses to one student, but yeah, we now have this response because of we now have this response of because of student number 2, going like these are some norms that we've made explicit, and here's why they don't belong in professional conversation. So that's the only experience that I have. Actually, I don't know if it's related to my subject or not. I'm talking about a design thinking class. We use an open access book from MIT. It's called Design Justice. The foreword for it is the author is transgender. And the foreword for it discusses the author's experience in airports. And it's very specific, but I've gotten the opposite. I've gotten students saying that they, thanking me for the book, and that they hadn't read something like it before. So I'm at a community college, North Metro Denver. So that might have a lot to do with it.
Hey,
So I'll
there's
stop
a
there.
question about what is TLDC?
Oh, okay. You have to put the semicolon in there. It's too long. I'm sorry. It's TLDR. I got it wrong. TLDR. Thank you for correcting me. I'm a little tired, so a TLDR. It's old. It's over a decade old. It's too long. Didn't read. And what I've told my students is if they want to, and sometimes my students do, want to go beyond like what we would think acceptable for that they have to label TL, colon or semicolon DR. It's an indicator on the internet that lets people know that now I'm going into my rant, or for us as instructional designers, now we're going to cite everything for you and tell you about all the models and where they came from. But that's what it is.
It's really interesting, especially in how you talked about laying out the format of these conversations that are happening online. I've had in-person classes where we just came up with code words. There's going to be a lot of conversation in here. If you're feeling uncomfortable, like things are going too far, and maybe we need to take a pause, let's agree on the code word watermelon means stop. Okay, somebody can yell out watermelon. Nobody ever did. But it was a possibility. There is no watermelon in the online discussions that are happening in my online classes. I've laid out ground rules. Here's respectful communication policies, but ultimately I struggle with students are interacting in a way that's not always in real time for me. I might not check back in for a few hours. How do you navigate that?
Rebecca, do you got something before I say something? Oh, okay. And this is just somebody else throw things out there. I would say I'm having the students use Discord so I see things quicker than me having to log into an LMS, an LMS for that. The other thing is you can quickly see in an online discussion, if something is triggered, you'll find that the other students get hyper polite in answering the student. For me, that's something that I see really quickly. If I suddenly see someone who's talking way more casual start responding in a hyper polite way, and some of my my team members know that about my emails too. If I get hyper polite in emails, it means that something's going on. So when I start seeing the hyper politeness, actually, that's when I start getting worried.
Very good points. Where's everybody else in this? Are you feeling the pressure right now? It sure sounded like it in the morning session.
I'm curious to hear from you, Amanda. I'm not an instructor, I'm an instructional designer. And I think I mentioned to you at last year's conference, I grew up like an hour away from where you are in
Yeah.
Clarksville. So I'm curious if this is like a new issue you're seeing in your class or if this has always been the case. Because I imagine, at least in my mind, I imagine students have been complaining, not just in like the last 8 years or so.
So, admittedly, complaints are relatively sporadic right now, but I have noticed them on the rise in the last 5 or so years. Students are seeming much more hesitant to talk about anything that they view as being political in any way. And again, my classes, they're in psychology, and we have standards. We need to talk about this and this and this and this. There's no avoiding it. I'm also seeing one-off events that are troubling on campus. I'm gonna go for it and tell this story. Um, several years ago, we had a group who identified with the KKK come to campus, and they were given a table to do their thing because it's a public campus, right? There was immense pushback from the students. They did not like that at all. And then there was immense pushback from a smaller subset of students who say, well, now I don't feel comfortable going to class because I identify with those ideas. Not something that I ever would have expected before moving to Kentucky. So I think students are on edge. There's a lot of disagreement that's happening. And then I'm also seeing this kind of counterpiece to all of it, where students are hesitant to talk about anything in class. And so we're not getting as good of an idea about some of the communication that could ease some of the difficult conversations that need to happen. I saw a piece a couple of years ago that said, why aren't students talking in class? It's because they're afraid of being recorded, and then they're going to be on TikTok forever having this stupid question or this stupid idea, right? So they're shying away from any topic, not just those topics that they view as politicized, but especially those topics that they view as politicized. And then they just kind of let it go at the end of the semester, right? There hasn't been the opportunity to have a conversation or resolve anything or come to a more common ground. They're just getting more and more pent up and then just letting it out at the end when they're stressed from finals. That went in a really dark direction. Sorry, y'all.
It did, but it's okay. I'm coming to the light, Caroline. It's all fine. We can do this.
It's hard.
I mean,
It's hard.
it is. And you know, even if you're not an instructor, if you are an instructional designer, you are going through things right now. And those, so this is a space where you can, kind of talk about that. So currently right now, I am working on an open access book with a colleague of mine, Dr. Amy Lamalini. It's going to be around accessibility. And one of the things that we had to make sure that we didn't do was politicize the book. So we were cautious with words, and we removed things that might be considered political or be politicized by individuals currently. So we don't talk about universal design for learning as a whole. We just talk about access and accommodations. We do not talk about equity, but if you create access, you're typically creating equitable access. And so it's just around the way, you talk about things, the way you word things, and it's not just in the classroom, it is in our everyday, in our work.
So
Very
I
good.
work for the University of Utah, and Utah passed a law that affects the public institutions there. And it basically has a list of naughty words that instructors can't use. And our university has reiterated to instructors that if content about diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of their content, they can use it. But I had some instructors that I worked with that were so scared that they started pulling content from their courses, even though it was relevant and appropriate to discuss in the context of their course.
And then Bruce also asked in the chat, could the reluctance to discuss be due to discomfort being redefined as harm?
I think that's highly likely here. We see more and more students who have pathologized this discomfort in some ways. In many ways, I am very excited for students that accommodations exist and we can help students move in a positive direction. If you are dealing with test anxiety, then you can get this accommodation that can help you with that and those sorts of things. But also I think that it's led to this subclinical group of folks, just your typically developing population who say, oh, this is uncomfortable, I'm nervous, and they think that it must be something bad, when really no, these are human emotions that we're needing to navigate. And I can see that discomfort from these hard conversations also falling under this umbrella, that they're not used to feeling that discomfort in that same way. Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat also, I wonder if they aren't prepared to engage in healthy conversations about difficult topics. Absolutely. Especially with all of the chaos that happened with COVID, they missed a lot of important socialization that would normally happen in those high school and early college and middle school years, and might not have kind of found their footing yet in this.
And that was a piece too from my own dissertation where I did a study way back in the day when we were just starting to really be online, and we had online discussions and nobody really knew how to set up discussions or what they really were. And then in my dissertation, I really wrote towards the fact that we don't teach discourse anymore. We don't teach people how to have discourse, and that discourse is healthy and it's not a fight. It's not an argument. It's not and you don't belittle the person that has a different opinion of you. So that was a thing that came up in that for me.
Very good point. Those online conversations, when they get agreeable, they're rough, right? So student one says students are round, and student two says, I agree. I especially liked the part where you said that circles are round. The circles are the roundest thing I know of. Right. Okay, but let's talk about it. Yeah. Where's everybody else in all of this? I'm hearing some restrictions in Utah. We have similar restrictions in Kentucky. And the guidance that I've been given to navigate Kentucky's laws is to be very careful when I am answering as an instructor and an employee of the university, and when I am answering as my own political opinion. So sometimes my students will ask me a question that I am not allowed by Kentucky law to address, but I can say, as a private citizen of the state of Kentucky, I'll address this after class. Do y'all have anything like that going on?
It's the same here. We're not really supposed to talk about politics as employees of our university.
I
It makes
think
it
I was just going to say, Ryan Martinez, I'm an instructional designer down in Colorado Springs, and our center has been given a list by our institutional research, and then uh, it's been kind of looked at by lawyers, and then we're supposed to kind of mirror that within our offerings for faculty. However, at the same time, we haven't necessarily been given directives. So it's kind of hard to balance wanting to stay steadfast in what we feel like is best offerings and the most supported practices for what we offer faculty. So we haven't made any changes yet until we're actually being told, just because we, as you know, as experts in our field, we believe strongly in what we've been taught and how we've been taught to make the most effective learning environments. And so we until we're actually told that this is not something that we can do any longer, then we want to continue to stay the course to support students, because that's what we're, in the end here to do. So that's where we're at.
I think that's why we're all here, right? Supporting these students. And it's gotten so complicated in how we can best support them without putting ourselves in a position where we're not allowed to support them anymore. Yeah. We also have a lot of talk here about whether we should make changes in response to things that we think are going to happen, or whether we wait until the last minute and make the changes when we absolutely have to. Yeah. Seeing in the chat, students are our stakeholders. Absolutely.
And this is something that was given to me secondhand, but and it was a bit of a discussion that's been happening over the last month or so. But I'm at what is a nascent Hispanic serving institute, and in Colorado we have a number of Hispanic serving institutes, especially at the community college. What was told, what has been told back to people, and I'm not talking about this as an institution, but that the institutions who are becoming Hispanically serving institutes should look to and learn from the historically Black colleges and universities. That there's a lot to learn from HCBUs. HBCUs, because they've dealt with this the whole time they've existed. So, I've been told, go to every session you can from someone who can talk about it from that perspective to learn.
Very good point. I certainly wouldn't want to overburden any of our colleagues who are working at HBCUs. I am sure they're pulled in a million directions right now, but when they're freely offering that vast knowledge, oh my goodness, let's all soak it up. Yeah. Very good points.
I was just going to share that I'm at DU, and we so far haven't been giving any kind of directives, a lot of talk about reaffirmation of values. I teach for the online college here, and we have a centralized syllabus that goes with every class, and then each instructor gets to personalize their policies, but the syllabus still contains a DEI statement on it. So far, so good with all of that. But this conversation is super interesting because the balance between getting at some of this and working on discussion, and also the amount of self-censorship that goes on, I think for everybody at every level is real and increasing. I mean, it's hard now, like to get it in any setting, let alone a conversation in an online class. But I do teach a class that is politically based. But it's sort of political philosophy. And the content, admittedly, is older. It's about 10 years old now, which at first I was having to justify for different reasons. I've been teaching this class for a couple of years now, and now I say it's healthy for us to dislocate back and talk about stuff that was going on 10 years ago and think about philosophies that are even older, egalitarianism and libertarianism, and talk about those from a historical perspective to give you the tools to think about today. And so far, so good. Not a lot erupts on the discussion boards, but we do a very structured, Canvas based, put your post up, reply to 2 people. And I do see the things that you've been talking about, like the hyper politeness and oh, this really resonated. And so there, to a certain extent, students, for probably a host of reasons. I mean, my students are across the country, so it's impossible to know what's going on in their locale at any given time and what they're dealing with. So for a whole host of reasons, I see a lot of um, that hyper politeness you were talking about in general. I have only had it one class. I had one student um, constantly post very conservative viewpoints um, throughout each week, and I'd take a week off, and then I would push back and then or say pick something out, or and I do a lot of not necessarily saying what it is I think. I'm like, I read you saying this, and what do you think about that, and it, taking it in different directions. And so and I but the only and so students were pretty, they didn't mess with them too much until one time I was grading discussions a week that had closed, and a student had gone back on there, I think late after, and really posted a like with swear words and everything, like a reactionary. So that was the only time a singular time in a quite a few quarters of this class. So it's pretty interesting. So
Oh, I'm sorry you had that most recent experience. The
that was a couple of
surfing,
quarters ago. It was like during the
yeah,
pandemic. So yeah,
yeah.
it was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
If I can follow up, I am interested in hearing that you still have DEI. We have rebranded in many places. We are no longer allowed to say DEI at Murray State. There was some talk, I enjoyed this, of starting up fairness and unity communities instead. F you. But you are allowed to keep that language, and you can keep statements and all of that still going on.
at our college,
Okay.
it's still there. Yes.
Oh, we use belonging.
Yeah,
Yeah,
belonging, we use that too.
that's a kinder way. For now, we've also not been. Hey, where is everybody else on all of this? I saw in the morning session, drop in the chat a Y or an N. Y, can you still have DEI yes or N for no? Okay, so we've got a mix. Mostly Ys. Oh, I'm so jealous. DEI for courses, but not hiring info. Yes, but secretly rebranded. Yeah, we're in such diverse places right now, from state to state, institution to institution. Does FU include the Marxist component that is a central component of DEI? So that's probably influencing a lot of our answers, right? The institutional pressures that are coming into play here. But oh my goodness, I just checked my watch. We are at time, aren't we? Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Thank you guys for being here today. I really appreciate it. This is a
Thanks,
helpful
everyone.
conversation.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Hope to see you in another session. Amanda, thank you so much for leading this conversation today.
Thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Alrighty.
Whew.
All right, Miss Amanda, you are done.
Thank you, thank you. And thank you for jumping into the conversation. I was so nervous that nobody would talk. How do we handle a, a conversation if nobody will talk?
No worries at all. That's part of the reason why we're here, right?
Yep.
So I'm gonna remove my name to just say moderator since we're sharing all of these. Thank you again so much and enjoy the rest of your time with us.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Lovely meeting you. Take care.
Very nice to meet you too.